There's no camera there. It wouldn't be a Shawn stream if there wasn't an issue. We decided to use a brand new browser source today to make sure that you can see everyone's face, including mine, which I just absolutely love. And now my face is all big, and here we are, and we are good. But it wouldn't be a Shawn stream if there wasn't a technical issue, which is perfect. So hi everyone, good morning and welcome on in. We're doing a interesting topic today, which I'm excited to talk about. We're talking about labels, and if in our lifetime they still fit, where they fit, and where they don't fit. So I'm excited to talk about our guests. We have 3 guests with us today who will be talking about their history of labels, their history of using labels, their labels that may have changed, if they've changed pronouns in their lifetime, and all conversations about that. At the end of our discussion today, we are going to open a little bit of a Q&A. So people had questions, or were like, hey, can you go into a little bit more detail about that thing? If people who are guests are comfortable doing that, they will. Otherwise, you can probably message them privately, and I bet if they feel comfortable, they'll talk to you, and if they don't, then unfortunately this would be the only time. Simon is such a star. How are you? Oh, mister, thanks for winking at me. He's been doing this thing where he just loves to wink at me, and I'm convinced that it's because he wants treats, and that's the time that he's doing it. So we'll give him some treats to start, and then we'll get ready. You folks are not here for me, you're just here for Simon, and we understand. We understand that it's just for the cats, no one else. There you go, mister. He's very, very, very good. I know, he's very well trained. If he can give me winks for treats, I will give him treats 24/7. I will give him treats 24/7. He wants to be part of the panel. I don't know if he'll have much to talk about besides going from being a good cat to a naughty cat, but we'll see what happens. So folks, we're going to transition over, and I'm going to begin to introduce our guests, and we're going to have our discussion today. So I'm super excited to introduce everyone and to get started. So if you folks want to use !hype in chat as we're getting started and as we're transitioning over, you can also use any of our guests. They all have their own command, including myself, which will direct you right to their channel, and we'll be doing that at the end of each of their intros to make sure that you folks know where to find them. So without further ado, let's introduce everyone that I have here with me today. Perfect. Hi everyone.
Hello.
So I'm super excited to be joined here today with FrankthePegasus, LilasFox, QueerlyBee, as we begin Pride Month talking about labels and how they've changed across our lifetime. I want to start again by introducing our guest and beginning our conversation. So hi, I'm Shawn. I'm a Twitch partner and I'm an ambassador here with It Gets Better. I've been streaming on Twitch for about 3 years, and I'm excited to kind of change my content. I've been doing so over the past 2 months, and I'll be playing games at their hardest difficulties, or before I was playing a wide variety of titles and playing a lot of Genshin Impact. So I'm excited to move away from that and move into some Kingdom Hearts. You may have seen me on the Tick of the Talk, or you may have seen me in any queer communities across Twitch. I was recently nominated for Queer Streamer of the Year 2022, and I'm really excited to talk about my experience and give you a little bit of what my community calls Shawn lore with my past. Our first guest today with us is FrankthePegasus, who has been a content creator over the past 5 years and wants to make sure she lets you know that she still loves it every single day. Frank is a new It Gets Better ambassador, who you might know being loud and silly on stream, shouting about how fat isn't a bad word, and their work as a Twitch ambassador and EA game changer. Frank strives to create a corner of the internet that feels safe and warm for people to express themselves. She loves to talk about mental health, sex, sexuality, fat positivity, all while being as silly as possible in whatever game she is playing. She's also an avid reader who loves to talk about the stories she has read. Can we folks get an ! FrankthePegasus in chat for you folks to go over and follow them? Next up, we have LilasFox, who's an OG It Gets Better ambassador. Lilas can be found creating content around mindfulness, telling and uplifting queer stories while creating a cozy and interactive environment. Lilas loves to tell stories while playing a variety of games, from The Sims, Genshin Impact, to indie titles, where they play those a lot on Fridays. They approach gaming differently by using it as a way to find intention and making space for wandering, noticing, and being present. They really love making games feel more approachable and showing how playing imperfectly and with intent can be fun and impactful. Their YouTube channel is recently growing, dedicated to this approach to gaming. They've recently partnered with EA and It Gets Better, as you may have seen the new pronoun update for The Sims. In addition, they'll be featured this Saturday, which we're all super excited about, co-streaming the 2022 Wholesome Games Direct. This June, you can also find them all across the front page. I think we're all on the front page this month, right? Anyone not? Oh!
Twitch loves taking my content and using it, but then not inviting me to things. Quite rude.
Maybe we need to start yelling at them. You can see Lilas on the front page this month, doing a big Sapphic Sim challenge. If you haven't seen their plans yet, get ready to be jealous, because I know I am, due to my little beast who will eat all of them. Folks, can we get an exclamation mark LilasFox in chat for you folks to go over and follow them? Last but certainly not least, I have QueerlyBee. They're a new It Gets Better ambassador who you might know for their work across Twitch and social media, educating about identity, inclusivity, and social issues. They're a queer, autistic, and chronically ill variety content creator who focuses on queer storytelling in games, conversations about identities and social issues, co-working, and crafting. They work to create a warm, censor-friendly space that is safe for softer humans and especially neurodivergent folks, regardless of what occurs on stream. You might know them for their work with the EA and Sims 4. They recently launched custom pronouns. Together, they are a co-host on Humans of Twitch, which is a Twitch podcast that dives into the humanity of content creators on Twitch. They also are a founder of Whimsy Action, which is a stream team that celebrates softer creatives, that's the word I'm looking for, and focuses on growth and mutual aid. Off stream, you can find B supporting other content creators in Stream Square, which is an educational resource bank for all things streaming. For streamers, by streamers. Can we bet an exclamation mark QueerlyBee in chat? I would love to introduce everyone whenever we have a raid.
You have the job. You have the job.
Go back in the VOD and clip this and be like,
perfect, go for it.
Shawn said it better than I did, so here we go.
Perfect, go for it. So something that I like to do whenever I do podcasts or anything of that nature is I'd like to try and have these bios, because a lot of times on Twitch we're very used to introducing ourselves and you're always like, what do I say? Someone just rated me, what do I say? So I always try and do these things. I think they're a lot of fun to listen to someone else talk about you and someone just be able to go into detail. So I wanted to start our conversation today by talking about our labels and being able to hear each person's voice, saying their name and the labels they use to describe themselves. So I'll start and then you folks can follow. My name is Shawn. I use he, him pronouns and identify as bisexual/queer. Frank, if you want to go next.
Yeah, I'm Frank, FrankthePegasus. I use she, her pronouns, and I am queer and polyamorous.
I'm Lilas. I use they and she pronouns. I identify as a lesbian and also non-binary, and sometimes I also vibe with genderqueer, mostly because I like the flag, not gonna lie.
Colors are a great indicator.
Yes. Hello, friends. My name is B. I use they, them pronouns. And when I want to keep it simple, I use just queer. But if I want to share a little bit more about myself with someone because I trust them or care about them, then I will let them know that I also identify as non-binary, lesbian, asexual, and polyamorous.
Yeah, so I think that's a great spot for us to start. And B said it perfectly themselves, where you mentioned how you have some identifiers that you use publicly, and then you have additionally some ones that you have that you will say if you're close to someone or in a private conversation. So like myself, I use bisexual publicly. I use the queer flag and I use the bisexual flag everywhere for the most part. And then if I'm talking to someone, I'll use the term queer. Like, I don't need to give someone my sexual or romantic history when talking to someone, and most people really don't understand the queer term. Do you feel that the labels that you currently have are the labels you've always had in life, or where have they transitioned from?
Before, I just want to let you know, chat is saying they can't hear.
Yeah, I just turned everyone up. You folks
okay,
should be much better.
Good.
So do you want to start, because you were the one who brought that conversation in?
Me?
Just, yeah, but labels. And have you kept labels your entire life? Where do you feel labels have went for you?
My labels have definitely changed over time. I didn't get to start exploring queerness until I was like thoroughly exploring it until I was a little bit older, just due to like some life circumstances and such. So, for me, it took me a little bit of time to figure out what those labels were that felt really right, and those definitely shifted and changed. I used to refer to myself as pansexual before I started identifying as a lesbian, for example. I didn't always know that I was ace for a long time. I knew I was queer before I knew I was ace. So certain things were easier to identify than others, and as well as certain labels were less vulnerable to share than others for certain reasons for myself, and what I was most comfortable with versus what felt a little bit more uncomfy. I looked back at like my first coming out post on Facebook I made on coming out day in like 2016 or 2017 or something like that a while ago, and it was very cute because past B was like, I think I'm non-binary, but I'm not ready for that one yet. So I'm just letting you know that like that might be coming. But I'm not, just pretend you didn't see it, but also don't be surprised if you see it. So yeah, I definitely don't think I've had the same labels over time, and some have been more comfy to share than others at certain points with different people.
I feel like that experience of like letting a small group of people know that maybe this is a label that I've kind of been thinking about, but I'm not don't tell anybody, is such a relatable situation, because you're like, I feel like I need to dip my toe in with a group of people, or like maybe dip my toe in making it public because I've been thinking about it and see how that feels. Like that's like part of the process of labeling, I think, is to like try it on privately and be like, yeah, that feels okay, I guess, but I don't really know how it's going to be in practice. And then you're like, not for realsies, but like for like maybe funsies for today only. How does it feel now?
Yeah, I feel like everyone goes through that.
Yeah, it's such a relatable thing. Like I definitely had that experience personally. So thank you for saying that, because it just was like,
Yeah, I totally relate to that. For me, it's been very different for my sexuality versus my gender. With my sexuality, I sort of like came out as lesbian and then eventually sort of gravitated to the word queer. For a while, I used the word queer as like, this is going to encapsulate my entire person. So it's going to cover my sexuality, but it's also going to cover all of the ways that I never sort of fully fit into like a cis identity for my gender. For a long time, I was fine with that. And like my gender expression was my gender expression. It changed very often. People were sort of used to seeing me do that. And it honestly wasn't until I started being more present on Twitch that and I don't know if it's just Twitch, but also like other things going on in my life. But I started feeling this sort of push to parcel it out and name it and think about it more and put language to it. And at first I was like, is this actually like benefiting me? Is this something that I need to be doing? But now, and it's only been a couple of months that I've been out as non-binary and also like labeling myself as that. But now I just look back at that and I think even in these 3 months, the people it's brought me to and like the understanding that I have about myself from being able to have like informed conversations about that part of myself has made a huge impact on me. So mine has been very much like going from like this like cozy umbrella term that like just sort of encapsulated everything to like now sort of like getting into some nitty gritty like words. And that's something I never thought I would do, but I've been really happy with it. So
Yeah, and I feel that too, because that happened with me. I'm assuming potentially maybe happened with all of us with Twitch, but like with Twitch, I was able to find a space and find a community who accepted me for where I was at and where I am at and where I'm going. And they were able to say like, hey, I'm this label, and I'm like really proud of this label. And I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that label of identifying myself at all. Do you feel that there were other people in your community or in communities in the past? So like many of us have been on the platform for over a year. I think we all have. And like you may have a previous community that may have introduced and taught you about stuff who may not currently be there or may still be there. Do you feel like those communities in different spaces allowed you to explore more, or like where did you think your exploration came from?
definitely. I actually was inspired by, not to be like plugging it here, but like I was inspired by a lot of It Gets Better ambassadors. I came and sat in on a bunch of conversations about like the non-binary identity, and it all, of course, it really resonated, and it was things I'd thought about myself for a very long time but just never really put words to. And then it also sort of, at the same time, I was having this like really deep rejection of like academia, which my understanding of queerness is really linked to that because I have a background in queer theory. I used to teach it. And queer theory is like so not into these like parceled out labels. It's very much like queer is a verb, like it's something I do, I present, and you learn about my identity from my presentation. And I think that it has something to do with that. Like, I'm not going to say it's entirely like my rejection of that. It's not that deep, but like, I do think it has a little bit to do with it, where I'm sort of just like, okay, let me find my identity now and explain it in ways that are unique to me and not in this like scripted way I've always learned how to express myself, as if I'm sort of trying to prove something there, you know? And definitely this channel for sure. Joyful Jupiter, I remember distinctly having a really beautiful conversation about like their personal journey. And a lot of it was like really, really relatable to me. So shout out to Jupes.
Jupy is an icon.
Really?
So I find that really interesting, and it's one of those things where like being around other queer people was where I kind of found my labels, but also didn't. I can think of my time in high school where like when I first came out as bisexual, everyone in my high school, at least, who were other queer people, were like, oh, you're just on the path to being gay. Like you're just on the stopping point, like you'll be gay, you'll come out as gay. And I'm just like, okay, well, like maybe that was your experience and was like where your comfortability was having that transitionary period, but not all bisexual people are like that, and I'm not like that. So it feels like the queer community can be very much a pro, and having the space of It Gets Better and fellow queer content creators where you can share and talk about your experiences, and maybe that might have you find those experiences for yourself. And the exact opposite, where people are putting labels on you that like do not jive with you at all.
I do wonder how much of that has, I wonder, I don't know, I'm an old gay. And I do wonder how much of that, I mean, old by Twitch standards anyway. I wonder how much of that, like if I had been having the same exploration, because my experience was kind of similar to yours, Shawn, where like coming out as bisexual at the time, pansexual for a while, omnisexual for a day, queer now, was very much like a moment of erasure almost the entire way through, where you're like not allowed to have both. You're allowed to only be one or the other. Or in my case, it's really interesting that you were on the path to being gay, because I was on the path to being an attention-seeking woman, who was only into women for men, which is a very interesting thing because nobody was in the room with me when that was happening. No man was there. So that's an interesting, like, equal but opposite situation. But I am curious, like, what current high schoolers kind of experience with that. And I know bi erasure is still a thing. It's still very much a thing in media. It's still very much a thing that's happening. But is it as prevalent in younger generations? Or is that something that we're hopefully kind of moving away from? You know, I I don't know that we have anybody in chat that might be able to weigh in on that, but that is something that I think about constantly is like, would this be different if I was coming out now? And how would
Mm.
that have affected my entire journey? Because I rejected the label bisexual as a result. Because I was like, well, if bisexuals are seen as attention seeking, then I'm not bisexual because that's not what I'm doing here. And I like kind of internalized a lot of the erasure, and it affected how I saw myself and how I saw my label very, very much so.
I also feel like sometimes on Twitch, I have this like pro con of like, I want to be verbally, authentically me as much as possible because I know it will help people. But if I'm still exploring that myself, I don't want to say like a tweet, for example, like, hi everyone, like it's Pride Month. I actually want to like change my labels and say that I'm queer. And then like maybe a month later or like 2 weeks later be like, oh, that didn't really feel comfortable or didn't really feel like me. So I feel a little awkward like being a public figure and people looking at me and being like, ooh, you don't know your own labels. Why should I like interact with you with that?
I think that's an odd pressure that we put on ourselves, though, don't you? Because we would never think that of anybody else. If you saw somebody
Mm.
else doing that, you wouldn't ever be like, "Oh my God, they didn't have it figured out the very first time," or like they tried that, but then they realized that it didn't work. I see people doing that constantly, and I'm just like, awesome. I'm so excited that this is an ongoing exploration for you, and I am here to support you. Keep me updated. You know, like we like I just want to be informed as you feel comfortable informing me. I would never put that on anybody else, but I do agree that I feel it for myself. So,
Yeah, I feel weird like personal pressure.
yeah.
My experience has been like the pressure is there, but I would say that like it is all very internal because externally the response that I received was the opposite. Like
Mm.
at one point I wanted to try some neo pronouns. That was something that I was very curious about within my own head, within my own like IRL life. And I was like not surrounded by a lot of people because we were in the pandemic. I wasn't with my partner at the time. I lived alone. Well, I lived with a roommate, but not a roommate I felt comfortable necessarily exploring that with. So I was like, my online community in this moment is the only community that I could try this with. And people gave it a try for like a couple of weeks, almost a month, I think. And I was like, you know what? Like, it's just not quite sitting right with me. I'm not sure if it's those particular neopronouns that I tried or if I would maybe not want neopronouns in general. And people were like, it was really refreshing to see someone because I have considered wanting to try with people, but I don't see people doing that trial period. It all happens kind of behind the curtain. And I really appreciated seeing you like try something and then realize that it wasn't quite working was more the response that I got than anyone ever being like, why are you trying things and not knowing what you're doing, you know? Like they didn't have that expectation for me that I had put on myself. The only
Yeah.
weird thing I will say is social media algorithms make it so those announcements don't always get to the same people, and I definitely did get neo pronouns for a while after I said like I don't think so. So that's the only challenging thing is like for folks to keep up with maybe while you're trying new things that you might get a little bit of that, but
I love that voice that you gave.
it's like the little internal mean voice.
Yeah.
I think for me, I don't know, this is maybe like the only place where I don't feel insecurity, which I didn't even realize. So shocker on that one. But I think it's because I grew up with a very scripted identity. Like my family
Mm.
very set ideas for what was possible for me and what I was allowed to do and what my life would look like. And when I came out as queer and discovered my queerness, my excitement about life, my excitement about figuring out who I was, all of that came to life and was like very much birthed for me. And I think that made me very much as an adult, as a streamer, as like anything that I am, just very, very into this idea that like things are always changing and that I get to discover things about myself on an almost daily basis. Like I'm genuinely one of those people that like wake up and journal and see like, what am I going to learn about myself today? Like I feel like a nerd, but like it's true. And I think because of that, I've made it almost part of my content, like whether it's my identity or just things about me changing in general. And I would just say that like everyone should do that. Like I think that the idea that we get to a certain age and we're done and we're cooked and we like know everything there is to know, it hurts us. It hurts us. And I think all of you saying that like your reaction, like the people that you've actually had have reactions to your announcements and things, that's what people actually want to see. I think people want to see you like getting messy and figuring it out because they're doing it too, and they want to know that it's okay, you know. At least in my experience, I don't know.
No, I think you're exactly right though. Like I think almost the part of it is like the figuring it out process. And I think like when we are in public, we're expected to, we feel the expectation that we should have it figured out and we should only present a finished product. But I think people kind of revel, especially in like live content, like where we are sitting. And I feel like this is a very unique to influencer content creator world, maybe, but is like how much you want to share and should you only share the finished product. But I think a big piece of it, especially as live creators, is sharing kind of the journey, sharing the process so people can kind of see like it isn't I am not going to present you a life that is figured out and here is the finished product. Isn't it beautiful for you to just see that piece? Like part of it is kind of the beauty of showing all of the nitty gritty and like the forward and backward and the upside down and turned around and all of that stuff. I think it's kind of I think refreshing is exactly the word I would use for it because you see kind of real life happening for you, you know?
And I think that's something that I've noticed a lot with queer creators is that more and more as we become connected with each other, we're more comfortable getting in the weeds and getting in the mud of like, ooh, I'm not really sure about my labels. And I think the pandemic for many queer people really was like, oh, I'm alone with my thoughts. I get to decide what I want to do with life. For me, I decided that higher ed wasn't the space for me and that I really have and I know others
The
have that
higher
same
ed
experience.
to Twitch streamer pipeline.
And I was just like, I was done. I was just like, I can't be in a space or like continuing to be rejected for my ideas, my thoughts, and what I love to do with my life and having that be my career. And then moving into a space where my ideas, my life, and me and my labels are all super accepted. For me, like the pandemic really opened this door of like self journey for myself, one, and then secondly also being powerful enough to be like, oh, I can leave the things that don't feel good.
Yeah, I also feel like, I don't know if you all agree, but I feel like I live a much more curated existence than I did before. Like because a lot of my friendships are online, all of my work is online. I don't come in contact with people I don't invite into my space as much these days as I did before. And I think that that has allowed me even more freedom to figure out who I am and to label myself, because I'm not put in contact with people that I have to like educate and explain my identities and correct my identities as much as I was before, which is something like it's a whole other conversation whether that's like a good thing or not. But it's definitely true for me. I don't know if it's true for all of you, but
I think I forget sometimes that there is a whole chunk, like my family, for example, although they know I stream and are supportive of it, really only a couple of them. I have a very large group of siblings, and only like one of them really is in chat consistently. And we're all terrible at communicating with each other kind of outside of that. And so anytime we do get together, I'm always like, oh, right. You just like you're not practiced at this and you don't know. My partner is non-binary and has been out for years now. And my mom still misgenders them. And it's just like, well, when I can count on one hand the number of experiences that she has had with them in person, and probably how many conversations, like, on several hands, how many conversations they've had, between the two of them, since coming out, and like, or I've had with her. And it's just like so strange to me to hear them dead named and misgendered, because I'm like, we are not around people that do that anymore. And she's like, it's not for lack of trying, it's just lack of practice, really. Like, she doesn't think about them. She doesn't, no, this sounds terrible, but like, she does, it's not like a day-to-day thought for her. So the pathway hasn't, crossed over for her. And so every once in a while it still slips out. And I'm just like, this is a strange experience. To have this experience is, I think, like the term of like, we don't invite those people into our space, or like, we're not in our day-to-day lives experiencing like anything outside of what is a very safe environment. And just like knowing that if you go outside of the little bubble that you've created, you might immediately be thrown back in, even with people that are good-hearted and trying their best. It's just like an immediate like, oh, right. And I think the safety of it is kind of a wonderful thing, though. Like, we get to curate our spaces, and we get to really put people there, and only invite in the people that make us feel comfortable to have that exploration. But it does kind of mean that there can be these like kind of big changes that are happening that other people are not necessarily privy to. And so, yeah, moving away from that space, it's like, oh, right. Maybe they are the ones that get like the more final product. Do you know what I mean?
No, exactly. And like, I'm not on Facebook at all anymore. Like, I
No.
don't use the platform. So
Mhm.
my life updates are on Twitter and with my community that I've created. So like, my parents, I'm seeing them for the first time in like 2 years this month, and we're having like a very long heart to heart about life stuff. And they don't know like anything about my partner, really. They know his name and they know his pronouns, because I specifically said, like, if you use my partner's wrong pronouns, like, we're going to talk about that. Like, that's going to be a longer discussion. And they're very much not queer friendly. They're very much people who are uneducated about many things. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation that I have with them. And I'm interested, I guess, the thought of like the bubble, and like, is that bubble bad, or does that bubble help us be able to get through our normal day-to-day life? And like, I'm like seeing both sides of it. I'm seeing like, I like the bubble because the bubble allows me to exist and allows me to continue to work and do my job, but I don't really want anyone else to enter the bubble right now.
Deserving of spaces where we get that freedom to explore, especially when we're at a period of exploration where that label or that, you know, decision might feel very fragile. Because I think we all go through those periods where we're not feeling 100% certain about the label that we're using or the identity that we're picking up. And then when, if and when you feel you have the energy and spoons to step outside of that bubble and educate people who you think are worthy of your time and energy towards doing that, who have good enough intentions that you think they'll be responsive to what you have to say, then that is a choice that you get to make. But I don't think anybody should feel obligated to, because I think we are our own best reads on whether or not that person can even meet us at the level that we need them to meet us at. And now I know in my life, I know we talked briefly each about like families and the struggle of families, and I have a similar situation of definitely a lot of ignorance, potentially some homophobia in there, and there are some family members that I feel willing to go to bat with sometimes, because I think they just don't know and they could get there and they'd be willing to get there with me, even though it would be hard. And I have other family members that I am simply never going to navigate that conversation with, and they will never get to see the full magical me.
Mm-hmm.
They get a half version of me that isn't as expansive and as whole as other humans who I've allowed into my bubble get. And that is a loss for them, but I am not willing to open my bubble up to people who may perpetuate harm to me or the other people that I've welcomed into that bubble.
Yeah, it's truly just not worth it. And at the end of the day, it's really not worth it for you to continue to hurt yourself after you've taken time away from that hurt. And like this conversation may be bringing up hurt for some people. So if you do need to take a step away, make sure you take that step away. And it's one of those things where family and their labels with them and things you say to them are very different than things that we say to others. So I find it.
Does that go back into like what we refer to as like our labels publicly versus privately, or it like within that bubble versus out of that bubble? I feel like that is very much where that sits, right? Like, it might be that I have this like very simple way of expressing myself versus if you want to like sit down and have a conversation with me and really get to know me at my core, this is the array of things that I would talk to you about, right? And I think that that's kind of where some of that comes into play,
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of those things, like, I feel like it's kind of like a Venn diagram. I'm a math person. My background's in math. So, like, everything in my brain always relates to math somehow. But, like, I feel like it's a Venn diagram. It's like we have the bubble on the left, which is, like, our truest self. I mean, the bubble on the right is the bubble we present to everyone. And there's that middle ground where there is some overlap of things that you present to both groups. But there are some things that I will never talk about with my family. Like, my family doesn't need to know my sexual history and doesn't need to know how I view sex and how I put sex into my identity and my labels. So, like, I just won't say it to them and I won't express that to them. Like, they don't need to know that. But, like, on Twitch, I'll talk about it.
It's so incredibly personal. And I think that's really important that, like, as each of us discuss, like, this kind of idea of who and who we do not. For some people, their circle of people that they'll have those discussions with is incredibly small. And for others, they feel like they cannot be their authentic self and are not comfortable in situations where people only know portions of them. And that if you feel like you need everyone in your life to be willing to hold the whole you, that's fine as well. It's just that we all have very, very different relationships with those people who can't see the whole us, and how you respond to that is completely up to you, and whether or not that relationship is something that you want to upkeep. There are some folks who cut off anybody who isn't willing to see the whole you, and that's a choice that you get to make and nobody else gets to make for you.
I think that's one of the things that the bubble has given me. Like, I used to find myself in this position where I felt like every couple of months cutting out a new family member, a new person from my life. And I used to have this tremendous anxiety that I was going to be left with nobody. And then also this like quieter, more scared voice that sounds a lot like my family. What if I'm the problem? Like, what if it's me? And the bubble that I have now not only gave me this wonderful, beautiful space to like figure out who I was more, but it also emboldened me to advocate for myself and realize that there are humans out there. I just happen to get a bad lot, but there are humans out there that think that I'm worthy of respect and being seen and having freedom in my identity and all of these other things. And if somebody is being cut out of my life, it's not because I'm wrong and I'm too harsh or too sensitive. It's because they just frankly don't deserve it. They don't deserve access. So I've thought a lot lately about like who gets to access me and what are the parameters in place. And so now when I do connect with somebody and I do let them in, it feels more meaningful because they've not to like make it sound like people have to like pass a test to like access me, but like there's basic things that need to happen before they're going to see the full me.
You set up some boundaries.
Yeah, I think
exactly.
I think for me, it's a big piece of it is I always feel like I'm asking people too much when really all I'm asking for is a modicum of respect.
Yeah. And I guess I get worried about like having my labels being like weapons against me, because I definitely, as more and more as I am working on Twitch with like advertisers, and I mentioned this earlier when we were just talking briefly amongst the four of us, it was like I recently did an ad with Studio Ghibli, and the ad has been seen by 4 million people, and the comment section on the ad is all about my voice and all about my identity of like, I would never trust someone with red hair to download this game. I would never trust someone who has a feminized voice. I don't really think I have a feminized voice, but apparently I do to the general 4,000 people who have seen it. And they're like, honey badger, I like won't trust them. And that's like apparently talking about a video online. And it's just really interesting to kind of see like, where like I've had videos myself that are my own videos where I'm able to go through and delete those comments or like mute words, like I don't see those things. And it's really interesting to be like, ooh, the publisher of this ad like does not care what comments are in this comment section at all. Any engagement is good engagement for them. Where me, I'm like, ooh, no. And having those like having my own identity like weaponized against me. Has that happened to anyone else, like as a creator and in like the space? Because we all have hate raids, we've all had hate comments sent in chat, but like, has there been places where like you haven't been able to like, we have our bubble and we have our outside of our bubble, or the places outside the bubble where you haven't been able to like defend yourself, and like what do you do in that situation?
I think for me, I've been very fortunate that my sexual identity is something that is less apparent. I guess, I don't know. I like, you wouldn't, what does it look like to be gay? So hell if I know. But I feel like for me it's never like the comments about my identity, unless the thing is, I get the clip is me talking about that specifically, which happens, it's only a piece of me, so like it's only happens a piece of the time. More often I get comments about how I look, which I think is a very standard affair for femmes specifically, but also fat femmes. So like that's where I see it. It's not that I haven't experienced the same thing. I think it's just that's something that I can't hide, and it's way easier low-hanging fruit for them.
Yeah, but it's still like, even though we're not like, I think we're moving in a direction conversation wise where we're being a little more broad with labeling. It's like that you still use the fat label to describe yourself.
I do.
So,
very much so. I think it's important too.
And I think like that being a label of yours and potentially others in the greater space, it's like people see that as both a really pro and like, oh, I can now feel comfortable and now have a label that I feel empowered by, versus people also on the other hand may see that as being an attack or a hurt to them. And people use the term fat for that sometimes, where it's both an attack and an uplifting. And we see a lot of times with the word queer as both like an attack and both as a term people identify themselves with.
It's definitely a you're in the in-group, you can use it, you're not in the in-group, you can't use it kind of term, isn't it? I think both fat and queer kind of are the same thing. It's because there's a reclamation that's happening. And I think anytime we see any kind of reclamation of a term, it is very much, you get to say that, you do not get to say that. Because when you say that, you don't mean it in a nice way. And when I say it, I mean it to take that power away from you and to remove your power from the word. And I think that's something that we very, very much, that I think that's like kind of what you're getting at, is like, I use the term fat to refer to myself because fat for me is a way to describe a body, and my body is fat. I could describe myself as short, I could describe myself as brunette, I describe myself as all of those things and also fat. And so for me, it's very important to be an outward facing person that uses that term, because it helps people to normalize that fat is just among any other descriptor, and it does not have morality. And I think that queer and other labels are kind of a similar thing, where we want to be public with them because it takes the morality away from it. Like, it takes the discussion of whether or not it is good or bad away from it. And I think that is a huge, huge piece for me of the empowerment movement of it. And like the part of pride that I think is really fun is that we get to actually be proud of those labels and say, like, you don't get to tell me that this is a bad thing. Like, you don't get to tell me that fat is a bad word. You don't get to tell me that queer is a bad thing to be, because I don't see it that way. There is no inherent good or bad to those things. They just kind of are. And they're only pieces of me on top of everything else. So,
and I've been seeing it a lot over the past year on TikTok, where people are using the term like neurodivergent more and being public in their identity and talking about, that's a very, very personal thing, where they talk about anything regarding their own identity. Are there situations where people are feeling that like other even more broad and very specific like medical terminology is being like weaponized against them? Or do we feel that like you being vocal about that label is both educating, and like where does that education lie? Like, are you required to educate about your own identities, or can you do something else?
I definitely don't think anyone's required to educate other humans in any capacity. Um, just like any content creator who doesn't hold marginalized identities, we deserve the opportunity to simply exist and um, prioritize our joy of things that make us happy. And that might be things like our interests and our experiences, and it's not always related to our identity. Um, I think I personally have curated a community where education is a part of the content that I do, and that is a choice that I've made, but I don't think it's a choice that you can make for other people where they should have to do that. And I also think sometimes I have more energy and spoons for it than other times. There are times where a hateful comment comes in and it essentially, I might address the reason why, and then they get banned and that's it and we're moving on, because today I'm focused on playing The Sims and I'm having a good time and I don't really feel like navigating into a deeper conversation about it. And there are other times where someone may drop a hate comment and I have the spoons and energy and the interest in pausing what we're doing and saying, no, wait a minute. I need to make sure that everybody here understands why what that person said was not okay, or help them. And I think I lean into the latter more often personally because I curate a community for neurodivergent folks. And there are a lot of times where I've had experiences where they genuinely just didn't understand what the social faux pas was that they had made. And it was based in things like Twitch etiquette that not everybody knows or has been taught directly. So I like to pause and take those moments and help that person potentially be a part of our circle and see what their response is. But I don't think you should have to. If you want to simply ban them outright and move on and get to refocus on your game and have fun, like I think you have that right as well. And I think it's dangerous territory to pigeonhole marginalized creators into feeling required to do that educational work.
And that's a really hard. Oh, go ahead.
I think Lilas was going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I don't know about all of you, but I think because I'm vocal about my queerness so much and identify myself very openly as a queer creator, I often get I feel a pressure and also get questions. So it's not just an internal pressure. There is definitely an external pressure too, to make all aspects of my identity part of my content. And I exist as somebody who still has quite a bit of trauma and recovery to do around parts of my identity, specifically, conversations on like weight and things. I recover from currently and will always from an eating disorder. So it's not something that I can really always navigate conversations on publicly. And then also, I don't usually like to have conversations on my neurodivergency outside of just saying neurodivergent. And I've gotten pushback on that from people entering my chat. Like, please identify exactly what it is that you're discussing. What is your diagnosis? And I have to set boundaries and just say, like, this is a limit to the conversation that I'm willing to have. I'm an open book with my queerness. That doesn't make that every part of my identity is an open book that I want to host a conversation and educate people on Twitch. And I think I just have to remind myself that that's okay a lot, because there is a lot of pressure,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Frank mentioned before about like quote unquote like clocking someone of like if they're queer enough, if they're neurodivergent enough. And that's happened to me where like I have a speech and language disorder and I've had it my entire life, but like I don't talk about it. Besides that, like that's the end of it. And when people are like, well, like what's your diagnosis? Like, are you this, are you that, are you this? Like, do you have this like written thing? And it's like, I had an IEP in school that documented these things. I went through many, many hours of coaching and training to get to the point where I'm able to talk the way I'm able to talk today, in addition to being able to create and educate in text form that I am able to do today. And that's like the end of the conversation. I don't really want to go into like, well, you may see me stutter on stream, and if I do stutter on stream, like if you point it out, I am gonna like feel anxious about it. And if I'm talking about other things where like if I can't pronounce something correctly, like I either A, don't pronounce it because that's like my coping mechanism, being able to skip over it, or B, I ask for a pronunciation, and some people like have difficulty navigating that pronunciation, and they're like, oh, my name has never been mispronounced before, why are you pronouncing it like that? So it's hard for me to like be in those spaces because people are like, oh, Shawn, you talk so fluently, you talk so nicely, like you don't have a speech and language disorder. It's like, yeah, friend, I do, but like I don't want to share that with the world because they don't need to. I guess I feel ashamed of it sometimes because I've always been taught to feel ashamed of it.
I don't think it really matters why we do or do not want to share the things that we do and do not want to share publicly. There are so many things that have happened in our lives prior to us being content creators that have no influence on our content whatsoever and is not important. And I think we get to determine and we get to say what is fit for a public audience and what we want to share with a public audience. And I think this is where, especially with live content, parasocial relationships get really like muddy because a lot of us are where we are, especially this group right here, is because we connect with the people that we are in our chats with. Like that is the thing that we focus on, is to connect with other people. And I think in doing that, they assume that they know us in our full entirety, or some people do, not everybody, obviously. I'm not pinpointing anybody in chat. If you feel attacked, it's not you. But it does happen where people will say like, or assume that they know things about you, and how could they possibly? Because we don't share everything about our day-to-days. We share the things that are fit for the public. I talk a lot about mental health and neurodivergency on my stream because it's something that I feel confident and able to talk about my own experiences. I think it's important. Also, I don't know that I could hide it because I actively deal with depression and anxiety. And some of the way that I cope is to tell people, hi, I am having a hard time right now. These are the things that I'm going to need from other people around me in order to get through my day. But I don't think that that's required. Just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean you have to talk about it. Just because you like, do I talk about medications that I'm taking? Do I talk about, like I'm not going to show you my prescription bottles. You know what I
No,
mean?
you don't need to see my prescription bottles.
Right? Like I feel like we're allowed to set those boundaries, and if somebody is unwilling to respect your boundaries on that, it is like a perfectly okay thing to say like, you are not allowed in my space. We've talked a lot about like, this is a space that we've been able to curate, and so much of the safety of this space is because the people that are in it are willing and able to respect our boundaries. So yes, I think that there is some like, when you want to, when you're able to, should you explain yourself? Should you talk about, should you educate? Yeah. Required though feels like a very stilted word. Like it feels like that is suddenly like, well, no, because not every day am I going to be able to, not every day am I going to want to, and nor should I have to.
We're not puppets.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
We're not here as your tool or to answer any and every question you might have. I think often something that I wish that more people understood as well is that if you hang out in someone's space on a regular basis, you're going to get to learn a lot of things. Most of us will, here and there, as it feels very natural to do so, will share pieces of ourself and our history and our identity as it is relevant to the conversation that's happening and as it's relevant to maybe the game that we're playing, etc. And so you might get to learn a little bit more about us that you're curious about. And similarly, if you've been a part of my community for a long time and you have a question that you'd like to know about me, I'm much more willing to answer that question to someone who has shown genuine intentions, who has been a part of our community, whom there is a level of trust developed there, than I am with a random person who comes in as a first-time chatter and is like, can I ask you this question about your very personal LGBTQ identity, please? Like, that's not appropriate. And
yeah.
I love these voices. We were talking earlier about using our own voice as our alerts and things. That these voices that you create need to be your alerts.
Truly. But
for voice acting.
I think similar to what someone said in chat, which is that like, I use a tag is to help you find content with someone who maybe shares like a similar identity to you, not so that you can come in and ask invasive questions. And
I think
knowing the difference between those two and how to approach asking one of those questions is something that I think folks sometimes need some guidance on learning, like if I have a question I'm not sure the person will want to answer, it's learning to say something along the lines of like, is it okay if I ask you a question related to this? And or like I've asked the question and saying, if you don't feel comfortable with answering that question, that's totally fine. I was just curious, but my curiosity is not more important than your comfortability in this moment. And I think folks starting to learn and navigate how to do that kind of thing, because that doesn't come naturally to everyone. Not everyone knows. Some people are neurodivergent and they ask very direct questions without any ill intent and need to be taught like, hey, you need to like do this thing to help make sure that folks feel a little bit more comfortable in the situation.
I think
Is
you just
really
put
important.
I think you just put into words something that I've always kind of seen as a red flag, but never really understood why. And I think we've all probably had this chatter, but it's somebody who comes in and is like, um, what label are you? Basically, like if they see that you're like LGBTQ, they'll be like, what label are you? Like, what are your labels? And like, it
I'm
always is kind
giving
of
you
like,
what I'm comfortable with.
right.
Like,
It's always kind of like, I will tell you, but also why is this your first question about me?
Like, I
And
also have my
sometimes
panels below. Like, panels exist for a reason.
yes, there is always like the please take the time to educate yourself. I do make this information available, but I feel like it comes from a couple of different sources, and one is a very malintent, and so the red flag is there because you know that that person is like there are definitely people out there that are like trying to get you. Like, got them. Oh, they admitted it. Like, okay. But then there's also the person that I think is maybe new to the community or new to the umbrella, new to exploring their own, and is just genuinely curious, but like is kind of, as you said, like doesn't necessarily know how to ask that in a meaningful way. I think one of the big things when you're asking somebody vulnerable information is to also offer vulnerable information because it makes it feel like there's a reciprocity there. And I'm not saying you have to be like, hi, I'm blah, 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 but even coming in and saying like, hi, I'm neurodivergent and I'm curious about like what kinds of neurodivergencies you have. And like even that, I would immediately be like, well, now I'm more willing to tell you because you told me that you're neurodivergent rather than being like, what kind of neurodivergencies do you have? And it's like that feels aggressive and kind of creepy. Like why do you want to know? What are you going to do with that information? You
I
know?
had to learn to become more patient. So an example I use often because I think of it is I had someone come in and their first message was about my eyes. They said something about liking my eyes. And every single one of my moderators and VIPs were like, I'm ready to fight. Like
Yeah.
what is
Mhm.
this? And I, responded to them because, they didn't say anything hateful, right? They just said something kind of like, this is a weird first time message. And their response back to me was, oh, I'm sorry. I also have a lazy eye. And I was like excited to see someone live doing streaming, being a public figure and has a lazy eye and it isn't, hindering them. And I think that experience and similar experiences reminded me to like pause and be more patient with people and not have that like instant almost trauma response to want to fight, right?
Mhm.
um and give
I
folks a chance. But I think that, like you said, like helping people learn like, hey, like give a little context
Mhm.
to what you're saying. They may
Yeah.
have never been in our streamer's shoes, they may have never been a live broadcaster and may not recognize how weird and aggressive that comes off on our
Right.
end of things.
What I always say is read positive intent into what people say. Because if you lead with the idea that they are doing it with a good intention, let them show you that that's not what they mean. Because it's really easy to let them have a second message and then delete and then ban. If they come in guns blazing, like we you do what you got to do.
Pew
But
pew, goodbye.
if they're coming in and saying like, what is your label? I definitely always try to lead with the assumption that they are genuinely curious, because they'll immediately tell you if they weren't. Like, they'll immediately make that intention clear after you've answered the question, or after you respond with, hey, that's in my panels if you want to know, or like after you set your boundary, they'll immediately let you know, I am not willing to respect your boundaries, or I am not, like, I'm here for the wrong reasons. And then it's just as easy to delete the message after the second message. So I'm with you on that one, B, like being patient and reading positive intent into people, because I've been burned by it. And I think we probably all have, because, sometimes your patience runs short, or you're having a bad day and something feels a little bit more intense than it maybe was meant to, or that person just genuinely was like, I don't know how to say this. Or I've had people who English isn't their first language, and so they don't phrase something in a way that feels natural to me as a native English speaker, and like all of those things definitely come across sometimes as like aggressive when that's not what they meant to do. And it's hard, because I think when you're in it, it's a lot harder to just like constantly remember that. But I agree that like having patience is a huge piece of it. It's not, I should be very clear that that does not negate anything else that I feel like we've said about, like, we're not required to have that patience. It's still okay to like have days where you're like, no, not today, not out, good, not doing it. But I think generally speaking, yeah.
I think it's really important, like talking about these low spoon days and these low days. For people who don't know, a lot of times people who are neurodivergent will use the term spoons to talk about how much either mental or physical energy they have to do a task or to complete something with other day. So they'll say, well, this is a low spoon day for me, so I'd like to put my spoons or my energy into these specific things that I have to get done, and I can't put them into the thing you're asking me to do. Or I have a high spoon day where I can do all the things that I want to do and do all the things, for some education purposes for people. But days when you don't have the energy or don't have the spoons to be able to talk about your identity and things of that nature, like, do you have commands set up for that? Is it just like, this is my panels, go to this? Like, what do you have set up for yourself that maybe others might be able to set up for themselves to help with that? Or do you have nothing set up?
I have moderators. My moderators are much more aware of my mental capacity going into a stream than like the general chat might be. But also I have a good community that I have spent a lot of time curating. So some of the first part, I'm kind of with Lilas on this, where like a lot of my first part of chat is spent talking about how we're all doing. So I get a general idea of like how the people in chat are doing. So if there's somebody in chat that might need a little bit more tenderness that day, I'm aware that they might have something going on. But then they can also be aware when I need tenderness from them and I need something from them. If something is, stressing me out, or if something is taking too many of my spoons. But more than anything, I think my moderators kind of know, like, I definitely have days where I'm like, a good fight is what I need today. Like, let him come for me. Let him come for me. Like, any troll that is going to come in and say anything about me, please let me have them, because I want to deal with that today. And then I have other days where I'm like, I'm soft. Please do not let anything touch me at all, because I will cry. And then, they kind of act accordingly. So I think, good moderators. And in terms of like just information, we do have some commands for sure. Especially things that when chat is busy, it doesn't need my individual attention. Things like, what are her pronouns? We have a pronouns command, things that are like really easy things, like, oh, how do I find this information? How do I get to these? Like, that's all. Yeah. Commands are king.
I'm glad that you brought this up, because I feel like often the conversation, and even like internalized for me, and actually, Shawn, you mentioned something about this before, like this idea of like certain labels and certain topics that we are more willing to talk about than others. I think there's always this underlying assumption that like the reason we're not labeling ourselves or having those conversations is because of shame. And for me, it's not true. Like, I'm not actually ashamed of any of the things that I choose not to talk about on stream. It's just that on any given day, talking about those things is going to take more out of me than I'm generally ready to give. And so I don't actually like have commands or anything about those things, because the things that I'm not able to reliably discuss, I just don't make a big part of my content, and I won't talk about them. That's not to say that I'll never talk about them. Like, I've had streams where we go there and have maybe more in-depth conversations about some of those things that are a little trickier for me or are more rooted in trauma. But that's not going to be a regular thing. And in the future, if somebody comes in and asks a direct question about that, my response is, and my mod's response is, nope, we don't talk about that. Like, it's not on the table. And I've been accused of being ashamed. Like, when I won't go into certain things, I've been accused of being ashamed of them. And it's just not true. And so I think that, like, that idea that, like, we're maybe just preserving energy, and that we don't have to, this is novel, but like, we don't have to give all of our energy to Twitch, like, that we can save some, like.
Like, I was
Are you
almost
sure?
not going to stream today. Like, you asking this question is making me want to stream less. So I have bills to pay,
Yeah,
and I have
like,
things to
truly-
continue to do.
Please actually say that to somebody one time.
I was just talking to a friend of mine, and I'm sure this is a thing that y'all can relate to, but in May I went through one of the worst depressive episodes I have been in since I was a teenager, which was great for me. Awesome. But it meant that like any of the days that I was live, which was not that many, I was not doing well. I was like, I am here kind of out of a sense of obligation. I am here because I kind of need to be, because this is my job, but I'm not doing great and I don't really want to be here. And I'm like on the verge of not being here. And I was talking to a friend, an IRL friend who does not stream and has no concept of Twitch. And like, she knows what I do for a living, but like doesn't, it's great to have friends like that. But we were talking about it and I was like, you know how like if you have a desk job, because previously I think we've all had some kind of equivalent, right? Like either that or you were a student, you can kind of like show up and go through the motions. And you don't have to be a certain semblance of energetic. You can just kind of exist and still get your work done. And I was like, streaming isn't exactly like that. Like it is when you have a community that understands to an extent, but still you can't just like show up and cry. Like that is not, I mean, okay, B, I cry a lot. But what I'm saying is nobody's gonna watch you for like 6 hours straight. just being like, I'm really sad.
I cried for an entire hour on stream once, and it was the highest viewership I've ever had.
Listen, I cry all the time.
So
purely on the idea of existing, someone recently described my content as B goes live and does what B would have done anyways, and is just live while they do it. But that is, I understand what you're trying to say. This idea of being able to be on or off is a conversation I have frequently as a neurodivergent, as an autistic creator, is that sometimes I want to be in community with folks and I don't have the spoons to be on. And it is very interesting to navigate because I think it is important as a neurodivergent creator who makes neurodivergence a part of my content and makes that choice, that I don't only show up at 100%, that people see me when I'm struggling. But there's a balancing act, right? Because there is a level of struggling where I recognize that I deserve space and I deserve not to be perceived in that moment.
I think that's more what I'm trying to get at. I definitely show up and I'm like, hi, I'm not doing well. I'm going to cry for a while. That's part of, I think, when I talk about like I show up and I talk about anxiety and depression, like this is, you get to see it also. But or sometimes not see it because I don't want to be on camera because I haven't showered in 4 days or whatever it is, right? Like those are all pieces of, I will tell you that I smell right now, but like you're not going to see me stinky. But I still think that there is a certain amount of like, if my job were to not be talking to a lot of people, I think that's a big piece of it. Maybe that's just what it is that I'm an introvert, and when I'm depressed, being an introvert is not streaming is those things don't work well together. Maybe that's all it is. I'm not sure. But anyway, I was talking to her about this and how like there is a certain amount of like I guess masking. There is a certain amount of like being a creator that you have to be. We're not talking about labels anymore, but
No, we are. We're talking about the labels that we identify as, and your mental health level is a label that you carry. So like, as very much as like, while you don't think like we're like directly talking about labels, like we choose to label ourselves as much as we want. You can choose to label yourself exactly with the medical textbook anxiety and depression and mental health situation that you have, or you can be very vague. And like, while you're saying like, oh, they're not labels, they still are, and that's just important to like show these like very ranging things, because something that like Frank, you've taught me, and is having my camera off, like on days where I was really really struggling, but like had to go live to make sure that I could pay rent because it was a really important day on stream. I like had my camera off, and my community was like, where's Shawn's camera? And like I made a command that like auto went off whenever someone said the word camera, because I was just like, I did not want to talk about it. I did not want to go into explicit detail. I did not have the energy to do those things, but I had the energy to have my voice be happy enough to be on camera.
Yep. It is incredible how much this is definitely something that I think comes with the territory of also being like a fat creator and not always wanting to be perceived and deal with the excess of comments on my looks. And also like the needing to emote. Like I can make a lot of like emotion come out in my voice without ever looking at a camera, having the lights on, feeling like I need to do something or move or there's so much there that I like, if the camera's not there, I'm just like, I sound the same, but I won't look the same. Because I'm just sitting there like gremlin mode, you know, like and it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to not have to emote or feel a sense of like, I don't know, people looking at you. It just is amazing how much more freeing that is. I saw B say something in chat about being a part-time PNG tuber, and 100% yes. Yeah, 100%. Highly recommend, especially if you're a spoonie.
I haven't PNG tubered in a while, and part of it is something internally that I'm trying to or done like a no cam, whatever you use for those days. Part of what I'm trying to navigate as a human is to normalize the idea that you can be a content creator and just be the gremlin-y human that you are that day. And I wouldn't push this for anyone else and what your comfort level is, of course, but I want folks to see me on days where I don't have the energy to emote, and build a community off of the idea of respecting the fact that like I am still here to hang out with you. You just don't get that from me today. And it is easier some days than others. I am better at being less self-critical some days or others, but it is interesting to navigate for sure.
Are there certain times? Oh, go ahead. Oh,
I was just gonna say I like that a lot. I never stream without a camera anymore. It's funny because when I first started streaming, I was exclusively a no camera streamer, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna just like do it sometimes, and then it just became this thing where like I never don't use it. But I've been trying to get myself to do similar to you, B. Cancel a little bit less, still protecting my energy, but like cancel a little bit less on my off days and just show up as off, and see how that feels and also be okay with that. I think where I struggle, is something you mentioned before, Frank, is that like I have centered connection in my content and I have centered community. And when I'm not feeling well, I sometimes can't communicate and I sometimes can't connect. Those are actually the two biggest things that happen to me mentally. And so being able to show up and like not being as engaged and or engaging is something that I really struggle with. And I'm trying to be okay with it because I really admire you for that, B. I'm like looking at your face on my camera right now, which is confusing. Trying to do eye contact. But yeah, so I don't know, it's something that like I really admire you for, and I'm working on myself, but it's definitely a hard thing because I sometimes can't show up and be me, like, or be for me that people are used to, because I have made it so that they pretty much only see me on good days.
Yep. And
And
that is a big piece of it, isn't it? It's just like you want to be there and you do want to be that person for them. It's not that. But in doing so, you're also, I don't know if this is a thing for everybody else, but when you center community the way that Lilith has and the way that I have, that means that you're also taking on a lot of other people's lives, right? So when they're having a bad day, you are hearing about that. And it's not that you don't want to hear about that, but I think that there are days where you're like, I don't have this. I don't have it in me to hear about anybody's negativity. And you don't really get to control that. The second you go live, you kind of are subject to handle kind of whatever comes your way. And I think you can set boundaries, but that doesn't stop somebody who wasn't there when you said, hey, today I can't handle this, from coming in and saying, like, hey, I'm having a really bad day and I'm glad you're live. Like sometimes even that is enough for me to be like, oh, I can't do this.
Because it's
You know,
also
even
like,
feel
it's like, fuck, they're relying on me to make their
yeah.
day feel better. And it's like, I've had days where like
yeah.
recently, like I've had days recently where like my viewership has been the lowest it's really ever been because I stepped away from Genshin for my own mental health. And there's some days of that where it's like people say like, I'm having a really rough day and I'm glad you're live, and I'm like, I'm also having a really rough day and I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh,
Yeah.
but now I need to continue to stay live to make sure that your rough day is better. And that I'm like, I have that internal conflict sometimes.
Y'all in chat are getting some of like the major behind the scenes into how streamer brain works, the good and the bad, the stuff that we like don't really want to tell you about necessarily, or at least I don't, because I do feel guilty, I think,
Oh
is what it
yeah.
really is. Like I feel guilty for kind of feeling that way because I don't want to feel that way. I love when people tell me about their days. I used to be a counselor. That's my background. And so like I'm not a therapist on stream, but I do miss like I miss being a counselor. And so in a lot of ways I think like a big piece of why I stream is to have those connections with people and to talk about, to talk them through what's going on in their lives, or just like even be a sounding board and being a place where they feel comfortable to vent and talk about all of those things. And the days that I don't feel like I can show up for them, I definitely like take on as like a law that I have internalized. And it's silly, but it is something that I kind of am, you know, I think it's a big piece of sometimes why we might cancel is like we not only do I not have the capacity to really like tell you what's going on in my own brain because I need to isolate, or that's how I'm handling it, whether or not I should be, but also on top of that, like I don't feel like I have any capacity to take on anybody else's, even the most like minute small things, like them saying like they don't have to go into details about it. I don't even have to ask them about it, but even just sometimes them telling you I'm having a bad day and I'm glad to be here, they see that as like this is a comforting thought for you, and it is, most like 99% of the time it is. It's just that 1% of the time where you're like, I need to go. I need to go.
These days when we've created content where we don't feel 100% ourselves, like after those, like do you feel euphoric about it? Like do you have positive relationship with that, or what does that feel like for all of you? Because I know for myself that day where I streamed and had no camera on and I had consistent numbers as I normally do, it felt good to me that I was like, oh, I can do this if I need to. But I've also had days where I've done it and my numbers have been the exact opposite, so my brain like raffles in that of like trying to feel euphoric around presenting not at 100%.
I think it requires a lot if you really want to navigate not feeling like you have to be on all the time as a streamer, it will, if it's a path you want to go down, you will have to do a lot of unlearning of neurotypical standards of existence that feel even more prevalent when you are quote unquote performing live, right? So like, to tell you the truth, it really depends on the day whether or not I leave that situation feeling like really good that I went ahead and still went live and had a good time, even though I wasn't 100%, didn't have my camera on, maybe, or wasn't emoting, perhaps, if I did have my camera on. And I walk away feeling really good and really proud of myself that I let my community in that way. And there are other days where I've done it and I've come off and I have wished that I had just not gone live that day. And I really struggled with, internal brain thoughts the whole time. And I was very self-critical and judgmental. And I just like didn't have a good experience. And I think for me, that is all part of the learning curve of trying something different that isn't readily shown as part of the streamer way of being. It's part of unlearning those expectations, and it is part of becoming more attuned to the difference between a day where it's a good day for me to show up not 100% live on stream versus a day where I am in a tough enough place for whatever reason, in whatever capacity, that I need to give myself the grace and space to say, no, I'm not going to be there today. And I don't always get that equation correctly. And to be honest, because brains are so fickle, I don't know that I will ever get that 100% correctly. And I don't think you should expect yourself to.
And I think thank you first and foremost for sharing that. And I think it's really important to hear that for a lot of people, is that we're talking very much about streaming and relating it to labeling, related to personal labeling. But like in everyone's daily life, is that there will be times where you won't feel comfortable putting the mask on and walking out the front door. And that could be a really hard day for you, is where there are labels that you put on yourself when you walk out the door, and there are labels that you wear when you're behind the door and when you're in your own space. Because like, there's very much, I know, for a lot of people who are exploring gender identity and exploring clothing in gender identity, there's clothing that they wear outside the house and there's clothing they wear inside the house. There was a time in my life where like I really enjoy my kilt and I really enjoy the way that feels, and my gender identity has not changed. I have not thought to be not male and identify that way. But for other people, them walking outside the door with a kilt on be maybe the most euphoric thing they've ever felt. So I think it's important for us to talk about that and kind of like bring it up within this context. Is there times where you've been able to wear something or do something on stream that has made you feel really euphoric and has made your label feel like today's the day that I feel my label wholeheartedly? And like, is there also that opposite side of things where like you've done something on stream and you're like, ooh, I don't really feel my label today? I know it's a hard question.
I don't have I'm very much cisgendered, and as much as I think about it, sometimes my issues with the term woman don't stem from my identity as a woman. They stem from society's placement of what a woman is. And that's a whole complicated conversation that has nothing to do with any of this. So I stick with woman as my label because it is. So in terms of like gender expression, that has never really been something that I think I grapple with. I will say that the days that I get to talk openly about my relationship structure are some of the days like where people, it just comes up naturally, because I don't talk about it all that often, but when it comes up naturally and it's a conversation that I can have where people get to ask me open questions about kind of coming into terms with polyamory and what that looks like for me, what that looks like for my partner, what that has looked like for us in the past, what that means for our relationship with one another, all of that wonderful stuff. Those are days where I feel so like good about being polyamorous, because I think every other day I'm just kind of like, it's just like a thing. It's not really like a big thing. It's like not even always something that's like an active thing. But like when it comes up naturally and I get to like have conversations, because I think it's something that a lot of people, even within the queer community, don't really encounter all that often. Or maybe they are thinking about it for themselves and they have a lot of questions about it and they're looking for somebody who's been through a lot of it. All of that stuff makes me feel really good. I don't know if that's exactly the question you were asking, but
No, it's 100% the question I was asking. It's talking about like labels and moments where you feel euphoric about your label and moments that you may like struggle with your label while being live.
I think most of my struggles with my labels are more external. Like I get greatly uncomfortable when people make assumptions about me. That's just like me. Like it's like I always joke that I don't even really like astrology because I hate the idea that somebody could like learn a small little piece of information about me and think that they understand me. And like I'm very much that person that's like, I think I've even said it live, like I contain multitudes, how dare you boil me down to like one little thing. Which has always traditionally been my issue with labels. So it's like, it's always kind of like my struggle is, what assumptions are people making about me based on my labels, based on how I'm presenting on a particular day, based on the things that are coming out of my mouth? Because like I said earlier, I'm like very much this person that is open to changing on a daily, hourly, moment to moment basis. Like I talk about mindfulness and being in the present. Like I am in the present. I try really hard to be there. And so I am a person in flux. And I think I get uncomfortable when people think that they know me or understand me to levels where they can make assumptions about me. And I think it's a really natural thing that people are going to get to know you over time and think that they understand and think that they know it all. And that's the part that makes me go, I just don't feel good. But internally, I feel like most of the time I feel like I live up to my labels because they don't feel that connected to the external things for me. They feel more like a thing that happens inside. I don't know how to explain it better than that, but hopefully that answers your question. I don't know.
No, I feel like that makes a lot that feel for me it feels good to hear. It feels good to hear that like you're comfortable enough with the labels that you've identified for yourself that no matter what you're doing with your life, those labels are presenting. You just don't like it when the reverse happens, when people are trying to put labels on you and you're like, no, 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 no. I am very confident in who I am currently today, and those labels are these, not the ones that you were assigning to me.
I think I also agree that like internally I don't struggle as much, because if you've heard me use the label like out loud, I've already been through probably that process of the internal struggle and really thought it out, and have I probably thought about it for years before it was ever verbalized as like an anxious introverted human being. I think the place that I find it most difficult, especially, is when someone assumes that one label means the same thing for everybody. And that if they have a general understanding of what this phrase or identity label means, then they can apply that understanding to everybody who holds that label. And while labels are excellent for building community of like-minded and similar folks, I, especially as a public figure, do not speak for everybody who holds that particular identity. And I think that's a common expectation that people, they ask you a question and you're willing to answer it, and then they take that answer as if that is the answer for everyone. And that part of it feels really stressful and anxiety inducing because I'm like, I'm just telling you what my journey has looked like and my understanding has been. And similarly, sometimes I struggle a lot when within our own community, um, there is like gatekeeping that
Mm-hmm.
happens. Is another area where it's like really difficult for me with labels is when like there are sometimes other queer folks who are doing what I just mentioned, where they're like, this is how the label works for me. And so because it doesn't work for you like that, you're not this. You're not doing it right. You know, I didn't identify as a lesbian for a really long time because there was so much within inter-community like talk that was very exclusive, um, that made me very uncomfortable with publicly being out as a lesbian because I was afraid that those were the sentiments that I would receive anytime I would talk about my lived experiences, and they didn't line up with people's traditional expectation of what it meant to be a lesbian. And so it's similar with how hesitantly I've slowly introduced my self diagnosis of autism. I don't have a problem with it, but internally within the community, there are people who are very unkind to people who don't have a formal medical diagnosis. And I
Some
think
people can't get a medical diagnosis, and I think people need, like, people forget that like medical insurance is something that is like a blessing and not something that everyone has.
Yeah, no,
Also,
all
what
of
is
those
the
things.
what is the difference between getting a medical diagnosis and not? If you live yourself, like live your life as, I have this diagnosis, I'm going to take and apply all of the things that help somebody cope. I'm not necessarily autism. For me, it's ADHD. I'm this in the same boat with ADHD where I don't have a formal diagnosis, but I treat myself as if I do, and I got to tell you that my life has improved since doing that. So what does that tell you, right? Like,
So many reasons that doesn't make sense, and I can justify all of that, but I don't always want to have to justify all of that, you
I
know?
completely
And
understand.
I don't struggle as much with like the hateful troll who comes in and is like, you know, hateful towards me being a lesbian or hateful towards me for being autistic. But those moments where someone within our own community is engaging in that kind of gatekeeping, I think that stings a little bit differently
Oh,
for
it
me
definitely
and
does.
hits heavier.
I'm curious if what you all think. Not to like take your moderation away from you, Shawn.
Oh my
Sorry.
god, go ahead,
I'm
have it.
just genuinely curious. You bring up like the label of lesbian and how like within the community, especially, there is like this almost like gatekeeping, right? That happens where it means one thing and then it doesn't. It's not applicable. I felt that way with bisexual, which is why I started going by pansexual, and then I felt like I don't care. So I stopped using all of those labels because when I was a young warthog, bisexual, there was like the gender understanding that we have today just simply was not
Mm-hmm.
as widely available. And I certainly grew up like not in a space where that even was an option. Like that was not a thing that I had heard of even remotely. So bisexual was very much men and women. And I, as I grew up, learned that that wasn't really what was applicable to me, did not care, like the wine, not the label kind of idea. And so I started using pansexual, but then kind of similar to Lilas's idea of like academia kind of coming into my own identity, I was like, I hate that this label even exists because like, what is even the point of it? And, all of that kind of happened. And I have now disintegrated into, I like queer because it just feels
Exists.
fine.
It just
Yeah, I
exists,
just
and you
am
don't have to
fine.
worry about it. You don't have to define
Anyway,
it if no one
all of
asks.
this to say, I'm curious what you think of like the generational divide with labels and like how language basically is failing us, I think is what's happening, where we have this like kind of post understand, like we have this understanding that like has not evolved with us, I guess. And so, or like maybe it has for some people, but not for other people. And is that really where, is it just language failing us? Is that where the divide is coming from?
I see it as queer people struggling to include non-binary people in their definitions.
I mean,
like to be really really forward about it. It's like,
I think some queer people, yeah.
oh yeah. I'm not blanketing everyone, but like very much so. A lot of the arguments that I see around people and labels is like, how do I include but not include non-binary people?
Mhm.
And it's like, well, in my definition of bisexuality, I am including them, but in someone else's definition, they're saying no, that's pansexual.
You're
That's
telling
not
me
bisexual.
that's exactly the reason that I didn't go back to bisexual, because I was like, I don't need somebody to maybe think that I am treating this differently, or that I am only attracted to two genders, or whatever it is. Anyway, I'm curious.
I
Way that
think
I
some. Oh,
go
you go
ahead,
ahead,
B.
Lilith.
Go. You know you go.
Mm,
I, I think language isn't failing us per se as much as people similar to queerness and labels, right? People see language as much more strict than it is, where it is actually much more fluid and ever changing. And you know, we see how, like you mentioned, Frank, that like the definition of bisexual when you were younger is much different than the generally accepted definition of bisexuality within the queer community now. Labels are fluid. This is where we get into fluidity, right? Labels and their definitions are fluid. And if you ever really want to understand somebody's queerness, you are going to need to ask them questions about what that label means for them, because we could all four sit here and hold the same label and have it mean something very different to each of us. And so I think that that's where it gets messy, is people want to put other people in clean and tidy boxes that will not move
mm-hmm,
via language, via
mm-hmm.
labels,
Via
and
binary a lot of times.
Yeah.
that is not like the point of language. That is not an effective. That's not how language has ever worked, even outside of queerness, right? You know, language has always changed and shifted and molded with each generation, and there are different understandings of the world. And the same thing is true for queerness. And we have to recognize that what is common knowledge isn't always up to date with language. So I think a lot about like what you were saying, Shawn, related to this, is that there are labels out there that are specifically made inclusive of non-binary folks. They exist. They're not commonplace, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are labels specifically for folks who are non-binary, who are attracted only to non-binary folks and femmes. There are labels out there that exist for non-binary folks who are only attracted to masculine folks. All of those, but we call them micro labels, and they're not readily understood, right? So for a lot of us, we may know this word like trixic or whatever, that like we know that's technically more accurate, but day to day we might not feel comfortable walking around the world and answering someone's question of like, in what capacity are you queer, by saying that word, because then I have to sit and explain that to you in more
Every
depth
single time, and that's like the worst
every
part.
single
Like,
time.
you don't like when labels are not common, when labels are not common spoken like words, it's
Mhm.
so much harder to describe yourself. Like, if I'm gonna talk about my own personal label, and this is me getting really specific, it's like I am attracted to people who, like, regardless of what their genitalia are mass presenting. So like they could be non-binary, they could be non-binary mass, they could be male, and like that's where I find interest. A lot of like female presenting and femme presenting has not really ever been an interest of mine. So it's like, what do I label myself as? Like, do I say bisexual? Do I say queer? Do I say pansexual? Because like, what are people going to be comfortable enough labeling me with that label for me to label myself, to not have to go into that long detail every single time I want to talk about my own queerness?
Because also, when is it relevant?
When
When
I'm
is
having,
it
when I want that person involved in either my affectionate or sexual relations is when it's relevant. Otherwise,
That
it's
is
not.
exactly it. And that is why I think I have started to just like kind of do away with a label, I guess, as much as I possibly can. And I just say I am queer, because it is not relevant. And often I don't even know until I get to know you. whether or not that's on the table for me, right? Like
Ah,
it's like it's not a thing that I feel like I need to tell somebody unless we're going to have an in-depth conversation about the types of people that I have been attracted to. And that's really what it is have been attracted to, my history of it, because anything could happen in the future. For me personally, it is the full spectrum is a lot of who I have been attracted to. I've been attracted to very masculine, burly, large men with like beards and, like very masculine energy. I have also been attracted to tiny little pixie ladies. So like, and literally everything in between. So when is it relevant to talk about it? Like
one-on-one. And I think that's
right.
the hard thing is like
So
people
when
want a label because they
Mhm.
want to find connection and they want to find community.
Yes.
And that's like the real important thing is like labels are a way that people can find community and can find space. We all use the queer tag on Twitch because it's very easy for people to know that they have a safe space and know that other people are going to understand, for the most part, the words that come out of their mouth and the words that they type into chat. So it's hard for someone like myself to where it's like, I don't need to go into my sexual history. I don't need to talk about what genitalia I'm interested in and what genitalia I'm not interested in. Like, you don't really need to know that, but like Kevin, my partner, does, because like that's conversations that him and I have, but like not conversations that I really want to have like in the public space, in the public realm. That doesn't help
Mhm.
anyone.
Mhm.
also recognizing that there aren't labels that effectively cover everything, even within micro labels, and that is valid as well. And you're working with the best words that you have to explain it at this time, right?
I
So
also I also feel like this like concept of, especially when we kind of get into like micro labels and like kind of like the nuance of what language is, starts to be a lot less accessible, and it starts to be like rooted in academia, which is rooted in whiteness. And it's like this very like white concept, I think, for me personally anyway. And like I feel like that is like a, I don't know. Again, like maybe this is something that you want to talk about too, Lilis, but like when I started like looking at labels and I started to like say like, oh yeah, that one kind of fits. Right? When I say I'm omnisexual for a day, it's because I like looked at it and I was like, oh, that one kind of makes sense and it feels right, but like it is so nuancely different from other labels that I was like, who cares at this point? I certainly don't. So I don't need this in my life. I don't need academia to come into my sexuality. And I at that point really started to kind of be like, I guess pansexual if you're going to make me force a label, you know?
Yeah, I think, even just recently, I think I was actually watching this channel. I think there was a panel on this channel. And there was a conversation about the differences between bisexual and pansexual. And somebody on the panel did not know that bisexual is actually encompassing more than just the gender binary. And I thought of that as such a wonderful example of what you're saying right now, Frank, because of course, bisexual was broken up to include more genders and expressions, but that happened in a lot of
Years.
in very like over time, but also like in the academy, certainly in like activist spaces too, but like
very online, which not everyone
yeah,
has access to.
yeah. And I think that like to many people, especially people that maybe we're having conversations with where we are like trying to like limit how much educating we're having to do, to many people they're going to see bisexual and they're going to think of the gender binary because it literally has the word bi in it. So like it makes sense,
Mhm.
and I think that like a lot of these like very nuanced conversations, especially these like micro labels, things like that, they're happening in spaces that not everybody has access to.
Mm-hmm.
And they, queer, I mean, you wanted to talk about queer theory like that. It's opened up over time as academia is starting to very slowly become less white. But it's rooted in
Rooted. Yeah.
Freud, Foucault, like cis white men, maybe some of them were gay, like that, like there's not a lot going on there in terms of diversity, like so like it's fundamentally flawed in that way. Like a lot of the language we have and we still use is rooted in like flawed perspectives, like one perspective that not everybody had access to. And so like I don't know, like going back to language, like I look at it always as imperfect. You know, we're dealing with like words that like have evolved over time. You know, for my own personal decision with my pronouns, I thought about using neopronouns. I thought, you know, when I'm considering things for myself, and for me, with my labels, with my pronouns, I go for the words that I think are most, the word maybe isn't accessible, but that's the word that's coming out in my brain right now. Like the words that are used the most. And you know why? Like, frankly, is because like going back to it, like I don't want to use all my energy. I like to save it for like my walks and like cuddling my cat. Like you know, I want to use like the things that like most people can roll off their tongue, and then just deal with the fact that like if I am going to put my energy into something, it's going to be teaching people that like their understanding of a label is probably too narrow and that they need to open it up for more expression. And that's like how I look at language. But I know that like I know many people, friends that love to like really minutely, you know, figure out their identity and have that attached to language. And that's so valid. But for me, it's like, I'm going to choose the easiest words that like,
Yeah, it's all the energy that you have. And like something that I did a lot when I was in academic was I was trying to use language in my paper that I published and the presentations that I did, and now I use the term affectionate orientation instead of the term sexual orientation, even though the term sexual orientation is very much more vocal and very much more understood and known, because I want to make sure that I'm including people who do not have sexual attraction as part of their relationship in the greater space and the greater conversation, because that's like something that like I saw a need, and I know that I have enough energy to help that community become more involved when they don't have the energy to do that for themselves, or may not.
I think this also begs the question of like the importance of labels, if we're talking about like for some of us it being almost a source of nuisance, or like a source of like maybe strife, or like it's energy sucking sometimes. Like, is there an importance then to know your micro labels, in the off chance that you might be able to help somebody better understand what you're going through, or to find other people that are going through the same thing? Or, you know, is it less necessary? Does it feel, has that changed over time? Like, I think for me, it has changed over time. I used to feel very much like I want to know my labels and I want to be able to tell other people my labels, and I want to feel connected to other people that have the same experiences as me. And I think the more I go through life, the more I realize that that just like doesn't exist. Like there's only a certain amount of like relatability that somebody is going to have to my own specific experience because of me being an individual person with individual wants and needs. Go figure. And so I have kind of like deconstructed it back down, and you know, I don't know if that's the best way. It seems to be working for me the best. I think it fosters more conversations about it, when I have that energy, versus like, I guess, giving people the information to assume some things about me when I don't. I don't know. I feel like I'm not expressing myself very well, but
you're doing
No,
great. Like, when you think about like connecting to somebody, like I don't know about you, but for me, like I'm not going to feel that connected to somebody over a word alone. But where the magic happens for me is when I'm sharing my experience with somebody and they share it back, and there's like there's something that we share there. For me, like the labels work to get me into the spaces with the people who maybe are more likely to have the experiences that I have.
okay. Yeah.
And then we can have like actual conversations about like what it's like to live like that. And that's where I start to feel like genuine community and connection. The word alone means next to nothing to me, other than to like get me in that space, if that makes sense.
That was my biggest issue with online dating. Like, I like being on Grindr and online dating. For the most part, a lot of the relationships that I was having in my early times undiscovering my identity and doing relationships was like, oh, we're both gay, cool, let's meet up. Or like,
Yeah, like
Cool. Like it was just like there was, I needed, like I wanted more substance, and I didn't realize that I needed to, I guess, give more substance potentially to get more substance, and that was like my issue a lot of times. What were you gonna say, Frank?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think when you're a young queer, especially if you grew up in a space that didn't have a lot of gays, or at least not out gays, it really feels like, oh, that is the thing. We are both this, and therefore we will date. And I think when you're young, a lot of relationships work like that, whether or not you're gay, is like we exist in the same space, and therefore I call it kindergarten friends, which is like a proximity friendship, right? Proximity relationships. But like, it's amazing how like that feels like that's enough for a while until I think you start to realize like more and more what you need out of a relationship or want out of a relationship. And then it turns out that wanting to bump uglies or not bump uglies is less important.
Yeah. I
I
think for
think
oh, go ahead.
I think like I enjoy having an understanding of my whatever you want. I don't know if I love the term micro labels, but it's what people understand in terms of more niche
Mm-hmm.
labels.
Mm-hmm.
I like having an understanding of them for the opportunity to connect with other people when I make that choice. You know, I often, and this is for me, I would not want to apply this to someone else, but I frequently, sometimes the sass I get from like conservative folks is that we're like too sensitive. If someone were to like misgender me, that I would just like crumble. And I'm like, besties, that's simply not true. Like, and if it is for somebody, so 100% valid. But what I try to explain to people in my life who have good intentions, who sometimes think that, you know, I don't know how to describe what I'm saying super well, but like I try to explain to them is that understanding me and being willing to respect me and my labels and us potentially opening up a dialogue of what my experiences have been and what labels I use and why is simply a way for us to connect on a deeper level. We can exist with you knowing very little about my micro labels and about the nitty gritty of my identity. But if you would like to establish a deeper relationship, whether romantic, sexual, platonic, or otherwise, we're going to have to open up these conversations. And that is a choice that we either do or do not make together.
Do you think that there's a label that you wish more queer people knew the definition of, that maybe either gets misused frequently or does not get used enough?
Asexuality in every single label under that umbrella.
I think
Most of the
letting
time.
people know that asexuality is an umbrella, that's like news to a lot of people. I think it's hard enough getting people to realize that asexuality is a valid thing. It's like
I
completely invalidated constantly. Yeah.
Yeah, I see people who identify as ace who incorrectly define aceness to other people as related to the to sexual act. So even
Mm.
within the ace community, I hear people often say things like it, you know, I have no interest in sex, so I'm ace. And I'm like, that's not the definition of aceness. Ace is whether or not you have sexual attraction to other people. There are people who are ace who have sexual interactions and like it and want to and enjoy it, perhaps. And so I think there's this common misperception that happens both within and outside of the ace community that really gets quite goofy.
No, and
I
I
think that
agree. I really much agree. Where like I had a friend growing up, she used the term like demi all the time because she didn't really know enough about her own transness, and was like, I don't want that part touched because that part is not what I want. So use that term because that's what like felt good for her. But as she grew older, she was like, oh, maybe that term doesn't really work, but the term trans works a lot better for me, and now I understand why I didn't want it touched. So
Mhm.
it's like it's very much, I think, like that whole umbrella of ace, demi, arrow, and having that space, I think is something that people like do need a little bit more education about, and might need to take some time to Google some terms and kind of do both of like the textbook definition and do a little bit of the not textbook and do more of like what people are talking and how people are describing it themselves. Lilas, is there any terms that you wish people knew more of or had the definition of that you hear?
I mean, I can't think of a specific term right now other than what's already been said, but I think it kind of just goes back to that idea that like so much of our language is so flawed. Like the word asexual, I understand how people think that it means simply a person who doesn't want to have sex, like the word aromantic. And of course those words have like evolved now, like a lot more time, like a lot more often you're hearing people say ace, arrow, because those words are shorter, but they're also less descriptive of this like limited idea of what that can be. And you know, I think I would, more than like a specific term, I think I would just want people to realize that like we're dealing with words that are not perfect, and they have all of them, many of them, I would say, turned into some form of an umbrella. Almost every single one I can think of has turned into some form of an umbrella. And I think that that's like the more critical thing that I would want people to know. And that just knowing the alphabet of the LGBTQIA plus doesn't mean you have everything. Like you need to actually now also put in the work of like really figuring out like how those things have changed and what each umbrella holds. Which I gotta say, I don't know a lot of even well-meaning allies who are willing to put in that work, because it's a lot. And sometimes you need access to niche communities to actually get the full picture. So it's tricky, you know?
It's almost the queering of labels, right?
Yeah.
Like we think about queerness as a verb, but like not in a bad way, but like you need like to understand that like inherently no words are ever going to adequately define the complexity of experience ever.
Yeah.
And that we're simply using the best words we have to build community, and they're imperfect. And the more that you try to hold on to them with tightness in a strong grip, the more you're going to leave people out, you know, even within trying to be inclusive.
The more imperfect they become.
Let people be the you know, we talk, for example, when people hold events, and there's this common thing that happens on Twitch where they like to say like this space is available for like women and non-binary folks, right? And we can talk a lot about why that is incredibly problematic, but that is an example of like, stop trying to like label a space for specific people, instead like let people put themselves in, right? Does that box work for them? I don't know. It's the gatekeeping is a very big problem when it comes to queer labels, and I think it is something that definitely needs to be addressed.
I think we're also like in a moment right now where like our language hasn't caught up to our needs, is I think is really what it comes down to, right? I think especially with like it's not that non-binary folks have never existed before, but there certainly wasn't representation like there is now, and there wasn't access to one another the way there is now. And I think a lot of people who probably are much older and are living their lives as non-binary would not necessarily use that language even to describe themselves because it's new to them. And so what we're seeing is that like a lot of language and a lot of spaces, we don't have the language, like it's not caught up to what is actually happening and the people that are actually existing and living within those spaces. And so instead it gets kind of convoluted and people are like, I don't know what else to do, so this is the thing. I think as a cisgendered person, so take this all with a grain of salt, but I think one of the things that frustrates me the most is definitely seeing like non-binary kind of treated as a third gender rather than a spectrum of gender. Not necessarily like from one point. I have heard it described to me before. My partner described it to me this way, so it was very helpful visually for me. So maybe it will be for all of you, but basically like we're all in a sphere and man here, woman here. Everything else is what we don't currently have language for, so we've decided is non-binary. And like that's like 1 point within a sphere of points, right? 1 point being woman, 1 point being man, and yet so like, you know, what they are as non-binary is not the same thing as B, is not the same thing as, like, they're not the same, and yet you all use the same label. And like that is, I think, one of those places where language is failing us, right? We don't have another term to describe what gender expression is and what we've come to know gender expression as, or what gender is, and what, like, we don't have names for every single one of those. And I suppose y'all could all come up with your own, but that seems like a lot of work then to describe to everybody else. I think that's why we always see those memes. I see them on TikTok constantly that are like, I'm a man in the same way that Kermit the Frog is a man. I'm just a little you know, like we all kind of like do these little silly memes to be like, this is kind of how I'm going to describe my sexuality, my gender going forward, because it is a place in which we don't have language anymore. Like it just is all kind of breaking down for us, or it hasn't caught up yet, I think is the better way to say that.
I think this is like, I think the spot where we're at currently is a great way for us to kind of segment into what you folks are currently doing this month and what your plans are this month with Pride, and how people and where people can find you if they want to talk to you more about your labels, or want to talk more about what work you're doing and getting a little bit more education from your background. Frank, do you want to start with what you're up to this month?
Sure. I am actually participating in a queer Dead by Daylight tournament this weekend. I think that's Sunday. So I'll be surviving with some friends in a really memey way, and really excited for that. I think we're all going to be live, but you can find it on Hydro's channel if you want to see like the commentators. I am doing some stuff with other It Gets Better ambassadors later this month, I think both here and on our own channels, if I'm understanding correctly. But mostly you can find me over at twitch.tv/FrankthePegasus. I'm going to be doing, this is an announcement to anybody who's not paying, you know, this is new to everybody. But I'm going to be holding a queer prom later this month on my Animal Crossing island, which I'm very excited for.
Oh.
So feel free to come on by. We're decorating for it right now, which is super fun.
Lilas, what about yourself? What are you up to this month, and what can you talk to us about?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, the biggest thing that I want to do is be like as present as I can and celebrating as much queer joy as I can. That's my like one and only goal for the month. But I'm gearing up for this next week, starting on Friday. I'm going to be featured by Twitch all week on the front page, which is exciting. And also raising money for It Gets Better project for a full week, which, you know, obviously I think is a cause really close to many of our hearts now. And I'm going to be doing a variety of things, from crowd control Stardew Valley, which I'm really excited about.
Oh,
where,
God.
I get to, decide what I'm doing, to continuing my Sapphic Sims Not So Very challenge, which has been a lot of fun. I really like storytelling through The Sims. So yeah, I've got a lot going on this month. I'll be live extra, hoping to preserve my energy too, though. And I'll be roller skating off Twitch to keep myself happy.
Perfect. B, what are you up to this month, and what are some things you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I'm attempting to keep my Pride as pretty much chill and regular as possible. Last year, I really overdid it and tried to sign up for anything and everything on my first Pride month as a Twitch creator. And I think recognizing that I just get to like exist as a queer person and continue to have the wonderful queer conversations that we have every single month throughout the year is enough. But a couple of small special things that we got going on. So on Thursday, I'll be live here on the It Gets Better channel with my partner Toasty, having a conversation about trans relationships. And then later this month, for the last 2 weeks of the month, from the 15th to the 30th, I helped organize, Sims Pride 2022. We are building a Sims 4 Legacy Challenge, where every generation is built off of a different queer identity, and raising funds for the It Gets Better program throughout that process of launching and sharing that to the internet. So those are the two projects I let myself and this sign up for Pride Month. But other than that, we're just being queer lads like we always are. Over on my channel, twitch.tv/QueerlyBee, and all my other social media platforms.
Perfect. So folks, if you're not already following them, all of their Twitch links have been in chat, and additionally any other social media that's associated. It's probably just their name in some way, and if you Google their name, you'll probably find where you could find them on social media across the internet. Last but not least, I'm Shawn, and on Twitch this month we have a couple things going on. I'm working with NZXT, taking over their social media for a week, which I'm super excited about, and talking about queerness with them. They have been super great to just like see a company buckle down and call people's BS out whenever they are being microaggressing and being homophobic to people on social media, which I've been loving being a part of and being involved in. I'll be doing a charity stream at the end of the month for It Gets Better, which I'm super excited about. I have a sponsor that is doubling our donations for the charity stream, which I cannot wait to announce. And all month long, we're just playing one of my favorite games, Kingdom Hearts, which brought out all the queerness in me in my lifetime, and it's bringing out it again. So I can't wait to do more of that. Folks, if you have the time and have the energy or the money, and you want to either share the donation link for It Gets Better, you can do so using that link right there in chat. You can also do that by just sharing it. Sharing it to someone else is 100% free and allows us to get the message out and still get some more information out. What we're going to do now is we are going to move into our segment of the stream where we are ending, but we're not ending on a bad note. We're ending on a high note. We're going to be sending a raid over to another creator who's a part of the It Gets Better campaign, who's currently live today.
Joopy.
And we're going to go see Joopy. So if you folks want to join us for that, you can use any queer emotes in chat. You can use any of our emotes from this channel, or any of the emotes that Twitch has provided, or just anything to share pride and share joy as much as possible. Again, I do want to thank all three of you for joining me today. I love this conversation. I loved having this conversation. I can't wait to have more of these conversations in smaller sections and larger sections and anywhere across the internet. So let's...
Thank you so much.
I don't.
for having us.
Oh my god, always. I don't think I can actually send the raid. I can just start the raid. So I don't know. I think we just have to awkwardly wait for the counter to go down. So we're going to move over to the ending screen. And I hope you folks can find all of us on our own channels. And we'll get you back around soon in a month for myself. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.